There is something magical about making your own clothes, from the meditative process of sewing to the reward of creating a bespoke wardrobe that fits you and your style perfectly. It is a real privilege to be able to share my wealth of knowledge and experience through teaching to other people. My name is Helen Rhiannon. I am a bridal wear designer, an author and a sewing expert based in South Wales. As well as being a bespoke designer, I have taught people of all ages how to make their own garments, from secondary school to further and higher education and beyond. In 2010, I set up the All Sewn Up Wales workshops, where I help teach people of all ages around the world how to develop their skills. In 2023, I combined my two passions, dressmaking and teaching, to publish my second best-selling book with Search Press, Dressmaking the Easy Guide, which teaches students how to work like a designer, how to make a calico toile to perfect the fit, and how to pattern cut their own wardrobe. On this course, we bring the book to life as I guide you through the steps required to create dresses and separates. I'll be sharing my expert hints and tips along the way. We'll work together through the process from start to finish. You will learn how to pattern cut your own designs, how to perfect the fit, and then you'll learn how to draft sleeves, necklines and skirts to be able to mix and match and create over 80 variations. I would love you to join me on this course and start your own dressmaking journey, developing skills that will enrich your own life and wardrobe for many years to come. This section is all about zips. We'll look at how to position them before prepping and sewing a lap zip and a concealed zip. Zips are usually sewn in the centre back seam or side seam, depending on where your opening is. There are a few ways of inserting a zip, but I'm going to focus on two methods that I think will be the most beneficial. The first method is a lap zip, and the second, which is my favourite, is the concealed zip. The first few steps of both methods help you plan where to sew your seams together and how to position the zip accurately. The two zip methods we're looking at today are the lap zip and the concealed zip. Now the lap zip, you can see the row of stitching on the top that runs all the way down, across and up, and the two pieces of fabric on the seam edge are lapping over the teeth, which are hidden underneath here. Now the concealed zip, you'll see only the zipper on the top, and it's a really neat, clean line. So you can't actually see the teeth because they are hidden underneath the fabric. So when you compare the two zips, this is your lap zip. So you can see the zipper and you can see the teeth here. And the concealed zip, you only will ever see the zipper and you see no teeth because they are hidden underneath the zip. When deciding on what size zip to use for your garment, I would recommend a 9-inch zip for a skirt opening. I would then recommend a 16-inch zip if you have a side opening in a dress. And then I would recommend the longest zip is 22 inches if you have a centre back opening. It's always good to get too long a zip because you can always cut it shorter. Now I'm going to show you how to prepare the lap zip. Now you'll see here that I have two examples. This is the facing finish and this is the waistband finish. Now the zips are positioned in very similar positions depending which one you do, but just before we do that I want to highlight a few key features of the zip. So you have a natural seam allowance right above where the zip stops, and that's either 1 or 1.5 centimetres. You also have a stopper here at the bottom. This can be metal or it can be plastic. So you need to be very mindful that you don't want to sew anywhere near that on your sewing machine or you could break your needle. So when we are positioning the zip ready to prepare for our seams, You'll see that the zipper is a few millimetres below the seam on the facing, and on the waistband finish, the zipper is a few millimetres just below the top of the waistband there. When you have those positions, you use a pin to mark about 1 centimetre above the stopper, and the same on this side. And then you can remove your zips, and then you can place the other half of your piece. Now this is the waistband finish, so what you need to be mindful of is that you match the tops really accurately there, and you also match up the seam, and you also match up your raw edges. So once you have everything in place, that pin there is replaced through both layers, and so that is showing you where you need to sew up to and to stop at the red pin. So the same on your facing, put your right sides together. Be very mindful of matching these layers up here, so you can see your seam matches up, and then your raw edges match up, and then again replace the red pin and pop another pin in just underneath, and you will then sew from the bottom up to the red pins. As you can see, the red pin is there to mark where we wanted to sew up to the base of the zip, but I've also put some pins matching the seams together from the top down, and this is because we want to sew with a long basting stitch all the way down this top part. We stop at the red pin, we change the stitch length back to 2.5, and then continue down the rest of the seam. The lap zip is a 1.5 centimetre seam allowance, so there's a little bit more room when you're sewing. So you can lower your needle in, check your seam allowance, and then just before you start sewing this one, take your stitch length as long as your machine will let you. Then you can start sewing right from the top. Take your pins out as you go. And if you feel you're going to overrun the red pin, then you can always hand sew the last couple of stitches. And when you reach the red pin, take out that pin, take your stitch length back down to 2.5, and then you can do 2 stitches forward, 2 stitches backwards, and then carry on down the rest of the seam. And as with everything, when you get to the end, do your back stitch. Hand wind your needle to the top position, lift your foot, take it out, and that is your seam ready for your lap zip. The next step is to pin your zip onto your garment. So I've positioned the zipper face down, just a few millimetres from the top of the waistband sample. It's face down and it's dead centre to the seam. So when you start pinning the top, to help you, you can actually lift up the zip and make sure that the teeth are actually going down the centre. So when you are happy, you can put pins either side to keep everything in place. And then you want to tack the whole thing in position, but we tack it from the right side. So that's what you should be looking at. Now I've already threaded a long length thread, folded it in half and threaded both ends through the needle so that I have a loop on the end. And what I'm now going to do is start sewing from the top of the zip. Now what's important here is you want your tacking to actually give you a good guide for when you sew on the sewing machine. So if you can try and keep your stitches straight, keep them about 4 to 5 mil from the edge of the seam, then that will give you a good guide for when you sew all the way down. So we'll start on this side, and just before I start, on the back, to help you with tacking, I will catch a very small amount of your fabric, pull this thread through, And just before the loop goes through, you put your needle through, and that helps you to create a nice simple knot. And then when you're ready, you can start to tack. So we come up through the fabric, and I'm just going to position it this way round, and then nice long stitches. So you want this to be nice and secure, so about 1 centimetre long and 1 centimetre apart from each other. And then you can keep sewing all the way down. We're going to speed up here for you. You need to check where your metal part is so that you stop before there. Sew a couple of stitches across to the other side, then continue down that edge of the zip. We're approaching the end now, so add an extra stitch to secure and snip away your thread. And that's your zip tacked in place. Okay, so for your lap zip, you are using a traditional zipper foot, which is symmetrical and it comes with most sewing machines. You just need to check which side you are positioning your foot on and hand wind your needle down to make sure that it's going into the fabric and not hitting your foot at all. And then go forward and back at the start, all the way down to the bottom. When you get to the bottom, I would recommend that you keep your needle in, you pivot and hand wind over to make sure that your needle, if it hits the teeth, isn't going to break. Needle to the top, take your thread out and your sample is done. Once you have sewn your seam, you need to now take out the tacking stitch, which is the one in green. You'll see a speeded up version here. Once you've got most of your thread out, the next job is to run your unpicker all the way through the centre to open up this seam. So be careful to only catch your threads, not your fabric. Okay, so once you have released your stitching, you can then reveal your zip. Now we just need to neaten these raw edges of the zip. So I'm going to turn the piece over and we will just tuck these just back onto themselves, and then you can pin them onto the seam allowance. Once pinned on, you just need to hand stitch as neat as you can your zip edge onto your raw edge. And if you need to secure the bottom, you can as well. Obviously, I'm doing it in a contrasting thread so you can see the difference. You can remove your pin. Make sure it's all nice and secure. And just finish your ends off. Then you can do the same on the other side. Once you have sewn both zip edges down on the inside, it should look like this, obviously in a matching colour thread. If you have sewn a lap zip into a garment with a facing, the zip will finish just here on the waistline, and from the inside, pull back the facing and pin in place. Same on the other side. Pull that back. And then you would hand sew the facing to the zip and the seam allowance, so all of this stays in place on the back. So on the front, that is how both lap zips will look. I'm going to show you how to prepare the concealed zip. Now what you'll see is I have a sample with the facing finish on this side and the waistband finish on this side. So just before we prepare the placement of the zip, just going to show you there is a natural seam allowance above where the zipper stops. So you would make sure your zip is done right to the top, and that is where you're going to place your zipper. So when you're looking at the facing sample, your zipper finishes a few millimeters just below the seam allowance. And then on the waistband, the zipper finishes a few millimeters from the top of the waistband itself. What you're going to do to make sure you get the right positioning for the zip is to pin along the side somewhere here. This isn't to sew it in, this is just to get the positioning right. Then you undo the zip to the lowest you can undo it to. And we're going to make sure that we position a nice red pin at least 1 centimetre, if not more, above where the zipper stops. And pop that in there. We'll do the same on the other side. So we'll pin this in place. And then I will undo the zip. And the same thing, put the pin about 1 centimetre or higher above where the zipper stops. Once you've done that, you can take your zips away. And then you can get the other side of your seam. So on the waistband, I'm going to place this exactly in line. Now what you will need to do is just check that any seams are in line at the top here. So if you need to rejig that, you can. So pull it back, and this pin is just to keep everything in place. Then the rest of the seam just needs to be lined up. Replace the red pin, which is your stop for when you're sewing, and then we just pin the rest of the seam from the base of the zip down. So we'll do the same on the facing side. So again, we put the right sides together, fold back the top so you know that everything is nicely lined up. And again, just a pin to keep that all in place. Match up your raw edges. Place your red pin between the 2 layers for your stop line. And then you can pin the rest of the seam in place below that red pin, ready to sew your either centre back seam or your side seam. Now that you have your seam pinned with your red marking point to start, place your seam in your machine and you sew a 1 centimetre seam allowance when you sew a seam for a concealed zip. So I'll start just at that red pin. Make sure you do a really secure start and stop, so forward 2 and back 2, and then continue down the whole length of your seam. And you're ready to press that seam open. Now that you've sewn your seam up to the red pin, on the concealed seam you'll see that you've sewn right up to there, but the top where the zip is going is unsewn. So I'm going to flip over this sample here and you'll see again this is where it's sewn and this is where it's unsewn. So I'm going to turn this around this way and you can just finger press the seams back on themselves. Rather than iron them, just a gentle press with your fingers is enough to have them in the right position. Then you get your concealed zip and you place it face down on top of that seam allowance. Then you start one side at a time, and the key to this positioning is placing the edge of the fabric and the edge of the zip together, and you want the zipper to be a few millimetres below the seam. Now this is the facing sample. So you do exactly the same if you had a waistband and it would go right to the top. So then you just continue to pin the raw edge of the fabric to the raw edge of the zip on one side. Now just note that you're only pinning through the zip and the seam allowance. And once you've done that side, you can turn it around and then you catch the other side. So you get the raw edge of the zip and the raw edge of the fabric, and try and get the zipper in the same position on both sides, so a few millimetres below the seam. Raw edge together on both sides. So once you've pinned that, you should see that you've only pinned to the seam allowance. So when you do flip this over, you shouldn't be able to see any of your pins. And this is how this is going to be stitched. So you want to make sure that it's sitting nice and flat here, and also any seams are in line on your piece of clothing. Now that you are all pinned, we are just going to tack the zip edge and the seam edge. So we'll start at the bottom of one side with nice consistent 1 centimetre stitches and a 1 centimetre gap, and sew quite close to the teeth just to keep everything firmly in place. Once you have sewn the one side, just want to check that you haven't caught anything underneath and that again, nothing is showing from the right side. And you are ready to tack the other side. So start from the top on this side, same thing again, close to your teeth and consistent gaps. We'll speed up again for you here. Now where you need to be mindful of is where your row of stitching has come up to on your seam, and you need to stop tacking about an inch above that so you can leave a gap between your tacking and your row of stitching. So do a little tack to keep that thread in place. Now the reason for this is because when you undo your zip from the right side, you will only be able to sew down as far as about 1/2 centimetre above your zipper. So you want that zipper to go inside the garment out of the way so you can get the full row sewn. So this gap allows you to pull that zipper through to the back and undo your zip. Then you can repin the seam to the zip and carry on tacking that together. Finish off at the end. Remove any pins. Again, check that you've only sewn through the seam allowance, and from the outside you still shouldn't see anything. I just want to show you the concealed zipper foot and why it's so different. It has 2 channels either side of the foot, which you roll your teeth into of the zip, and as you sew, the teeth are rolled out of the way so you can get as close as possible to the inside of the zip. Ideally, you want your 2 rows of stitching to meet up at exactly the same spot. This is tricky, it takes practice, but the key is tacking well. When you are ready to sew your concealed zip in place, you will need to make sure that you have changed from your normal foot to your concealed zipper foot. Also make sure that the needle is lined up with the hole and isn't going to hit any metal. Then take one side of the zip, make sure that you are sewing through 1 layer of zip and 1 layer of seam allowance. Then place this under the foot, and before you lower the foot, roll the teeth of the zip out to the side. Now in this case, the teeth of the zip are on the left and the needle is in the middle. So your teeth have gone from flat to being on their side. Then you are ready to start sewing. So hand wind your needle down, do a back stitch and then sew all the way down. Try and keep everything flat at the bottom so nothing is pulling. And continue until you can't sew anymore. When you've reached that point, reverse. And then hand wind your needle and take your zipper out. Then repeat on the other side. This time you'll put the teeth to the right-hand side of the needle. Again, check you're only sewing through 1 layer of zip and your seam allowance. Roll the teeth out into the groove of the foot. Once you are happy, lower your needle, reverse and sew all the way down. Make sure everything's flat and sew until you can't sew anymore. And I will show you what your zip should look like from the inside next. Once you have removed your tacking, this is the point where you're going to do your zip up. So the zipper currently is underneath here, so you need to just poke it to the underside here of the zip, and that will allow you to pull the zip up. So what you're going to do now is pull the zip the whole way up, do a little dance, say a little prayer, and hope that it's going to be perfect. Once you've pulled it a set way, you can turn it over and then continue all the way up to the top. And that is what you need to see from the front. There are no lumps or bumps here. You can't see the zipper. Now, obviously, I've sewn a red zip in cream fabric so you can see a hint of it. But the better you can match your zip to the fabric, the less chance you'll see any of your zip. When your zip is done up to the top, the last thing to do on the facing is to roll it back to the inside. So you pull back the raw edge of your zip, fold back a seam allowance on the facing and press it back in place. And you can secure that with a pin. Same on the other side. Take the seam allowance to one side, pull back the facing and pin in place. Now before you sew that, you can turn this over and just check that you have folded them back so that everything is equal. And when you are happy with that, you can undo the zip, turn it back over and then tack each side to the zipper. So again, nothing goes to the front, just your seam allowances and your zip seam allowance are sewn together. Once your facing is pinned back in place, you just need to tack. So start with your needle and thread at the bottom, and then just make sure that everything is through your seam edges and that nothing is going to the outside. Do a few stitches at the top to keep it all secured in place. And rather than cut there, just feed your needle back in between your layers. And pull it out a little bit further along so that your ends are secure inside. And you can cut there. Once you have tacked both facings, if you want to, you can tack the base of the zip onto the seam allowances if your zip was too long, just to keep the ends in place. And then your concealed zip is complete. Once you have hand sewn the facings in place, it should look like this on the inside with a matching coloured thread. If you have sewn a concealed zip into a garment with a waistband, the zip should finish right on the top there, and you'll find the zip edges will be poking up. So all you need to do is tuck those zip edges behind the seam allowance and pin in place. So again on this side, just pin that back to the seam edge. It's a little bit fiddly to do, but once you are happy and they are pinned and you can't see them from the front, you can hand stitch them in place, and that is how both concealed zips should look from the front. In the next lesson, we're going to put everything together that you have learnt and construct your final dress.